Hi.
Hi everybody. Still in the house, new setup. The reason we're not outside is because we got eaten by the bugs. So there's
Like,
been a lot of storm. It's summer, but it's been flooding. I don't know if you guys saw the post. But horse flies, I don't know, every bug on earth
I
just
think,
decided to attack
yeah,
us.
and also like I think here multiple birds have orgies with one another, and there's like different animals that come out of it, like mutations, maybe straight from aliens.
Oh, it's a tropical country.
Yeah, it's insane.
So if you're in the US, you don't understand. If you ever lived in any tropical country, you know exactly what we're talking about.
The other day there was a cockroach with two like beams.
So you understand, I picked it up in the middle of the night because I wake up and then I see those very, very bright green lights. I thought it was my AirPods. So you have to understand, my AirPods don't have a green light on them. But in the middle of the night when I wake up, it did not seem obvious. So I was like, it's some type of electronic that is there. So I actually grabbed it. And then I'm like, well, that doesn't sound like something technological, so I kind of threw it away. Turns out it's a form of cockroach that has like two super bright green lights on its back. I'll post a picture if you guys want.
Theory, I think it was.
It looks radioactive. I've seen it in comic books. If that thing bites you, that's when you get superpower. Yeah. Unfortunately, I did not get bitten, so I will not get superpower. I do not want to be cockroach man anyway.
But I think maybe it was a firefly, maybe mixed with a cockroach.
No, it's a cockroach I have here, but it's the brightest, most neon green light you've ever seen. It's nuts. It looks like it's from a computer. I kid you not.
Or aliens.
Anyway, that too. Anyway, so
right inside of the house, it's literally a cabin.
In the woods.
In the woods. In the forest.
In the jungle. Anyway.
So it looks like it's in.
There you go. So, sorry we did not post as many podcasts. We had one ready last week and then we lost the files. So, there you go.
We had to switch phones and lost the file.
Prior to that, there was the 2 trips and then in between I had the vestibular neuritis. And on top of it, I got sick after that. Like after the neuritis, the 2 weeks, I got sick. Sorry.
Bless you.
Some might say COVID, others might say just sick. But I was knocked out for another 2 weeks. My nose was making me sound a certain way, so no podcast. So
yeah, I think there was a mix of just the heavy medication that they gave you.
Right, because I was on corticosteroids. That wrecked me. Like I could not sense my stomach in any shape or form for like a month. Anyway, all that to say, we left you hanging with the podcast, but the Strongfit Podcast is back, and we're gonna make an effort toward that. So. Today we're going to talk about a very interesting idea of downregulation versus upregulation. But before that, I want to announce that the new mentoring program will start in January.
First week of January, right?
Or second week of January. Let's not just...
Brazilian first week of January.
In January, the new mentoring program is coming, and it will be for autism and anxiety. We had that seminar in Bloomington. That went very well, and already I think 9 or 10 coaches out of that seminar want to enter the mentoring program. Right. I got at least 6 coaches on my mentoring program right now that want to switch. So I'm expecting around 20 people right away.
It's a good start.
So what is the point of that mentoring program? So obviously teach the coaches how to deal with hard cases of anxiety, right? How do we deal with panic attacks? That'll be today's podcast. And on the other side, how do we deal with a very underserved population that is the autistic population? High functioning autistic people like us, all the way down to kids with ASD. How do we deal with this? Obviously, you're not going to learn that in a weekend. But it has to start somewhere, and so we decided to do that. The intent of the mentoring program really is to have a year-long program where you will come and do 2 coaches a week, right, at Max Gym in Los Angeles, and at the end of that year, to give you some type of piece of paper that has a certain meaning, at least for us, and hopefully by then offer you a job in one of the new gyms we want to open. That's my trip to San Francisco, where I am trying to start something where we will open a number of gyms toward autism and anxiety. How many gyms? We most likely will start with 3 and finish with, 3,000, 5,000, who knows? Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to talk too much about it because I want to jinx it, but that has the potential to go very large. I'm 95% sure it's going to happen, but 95% is not 100%. So I don't want to talk too much about it.
The
hope is
the
that
potential and the hope is there.
the potential
right?
and the hope for the mentoring program is that a year from now we will have a number of gyms, and I will need coaches for those gyms. And so, if you like us, if we like you, you find us competent, we find you competent, then I would love to be able to offer you a job in the new gym. At least a way to become a coach there. I don't know exactly what shape it's going to be, but my intent is to create a new coaching line.
Lane,
field,
basically. Like a lane of new coaches and a new way of...
Toward anxiety and autism. Yeah, that's really what we're trying to do with this. And so with a job at the end, which would be the greatest one, or at least, again, if you like you, we like you, you like us, then to have a concrete thing at the end. At least that's the intent. We'll see where we go, but that's the intent, right? Anyway, I'll talk about that some more, but it looks very, very promising. We're just not there yet. You know what I mean? The girl is not in the Uber. Don't talk about it.
I don't think people understand what you mean with...
Of course they do. All the guys, you know what I'm saying, right? You had dinner, there was a kiss, everything is cool, and now it's the second date. She's coming to your place. You're cooking dinner. She's coming to your place, and you're hoping things are gonna happen.
There was never a dinner cooked for me by you.
No, we went to the restaurant.
Oh. Okay.
But it was the same thing. Like until you were in the Uber, it didn't count. Same idea. Anyway.
There.
Right. So, but the point is, the Uber, you know she's coming because you get to check.
Understand.
You understand. You all understood what I meant. Exactly.
Okay.
Right.
Anyway.
So
back to anxiety.
Before we get to the autism, I want to talk a little bit about the anxiety part of all this, of my trip to Los Angeles with Dr. Nasser, because I saw some very interesting things that I've been trying to wrap my head around for a while now, because I saw the same pattern happening again and again. And I was reading a paper the other day that were, as usual, explaining everything that I saw from a study perspective. So when I was in Los Angeles with Dr. Nasser's patients, you have to understand they come from a rough background. Serious cases, like sometimes the usual trauma of some form, right? But they ended up with usually suicide attempts, things like that. So rough cases, right? And the idea was to build distress tolerance, resilience to stress, right? So Dr. Nasser would put a video on with violent video and sounds to create a specific response that would show in the sympathetic parasympathetic ratio. There are ways to measure this. And we would do the session, and at the end of the session, we will repeat another video with sounds and everything, but to see if the resilience to stress, the ratio parasympathetic-sympathetic, had gotten better or not. And in all cases, we saw vast improvements in session to session, and with 3 sessions already, great improvement, great results on that stress tolerance and everything. So the Strongfit principles work, the stuff works, but now we're going to be able to measure it. So the idea also is, why does it work, so that we can systemize it and again and start to create a system that will benefit people without relying, like knowing exactly where we're going with the thing. Like, how do we build workouts for that? What measures are we looking for? When we do the what markers? When I do Q-1, what is it I'm looking for? How do I measure it so I know that I'm there? Long enough, too long, lower, high, like how do I do all this, right? So we need markers. So that's also the point of what we're doing with Dr. Nasser. But then through those sessions that work really well, I saw something. I saw, like, we start the Q-1, and at some point you see them starting to fixate. Like, eyes go there, and they basically start to, because they start to go up, because it's a Q-1, the stress of the airline, no one likes that. So, mid 3, 4, you can tell they're like, oh shit, right? And then they start to fixate. So they start to go down. And then out of that, a panic attack started, so I had to take the person out of the airline and say, no, come back with me. I would make her do the cyclical squat, the proper breathing, that I could put her to Q-1 back and forth. But I saw, for example, also another patient that was starting to pull the ropes by the 3rd session, and she was enjoying it. Like she was starting to, her eyes were wide open. She had like that droopy left eye at first, but by the 3rd session, her eyes were wide open, and you could tell she was enjoying the sympathetic. But that pushing hard was not putting her into a panic attack. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. But then what I realized something is that anytime there was a panic attack, before that, there was that fixation of a specific spot where they were actually calming themselves down. And it seems that it was post-downregulation that they would end up in a panic attack, not from the stress of the workout itself. So I was like, ooh, that's an interesting... But that's not always, but I'd seen that many, many times before, that downregulation seems to trigger something. So
that freeze mode, right?
That freeze mode. So if we look at the phylogenetic hierarchy, the will, we go flight to freeze. But I was like, but then it seems, we talked about that, the only way out of freeze is fight. But before that, then where is the panic attack? The panic attack is obviously a flight mode, but the flight mode doesn't lead you to freeze right away. So I was starting to, I wanted to understand how all this works. For example, if we look at parasympathetic, sympathetic, sometimes they work together, sometimes they work separately. I can tell you something. When they work together is when you see a fight. A guy who's fighting well, right, who wants to win, who thinks has a confidence to win, you'll see him use both sympathetic and parasympathetic. He can't go full sympathetic because otherwise, anytime there's a feint or a trap, you fall into it, you get knocked out. So he's going there, and suddenly you see him doing this, backing off, because he's realizing the guy is setting me up a trap or whatever. He's not in flight mode. He's actually in a fight mode. He's just smart enough to be able to strategize and not fall in obvious traps.
Yeah.
Right, so that requires a pause.
An assessment moment.
An assessment moment, right.
And assess and reassess to the fight.
And that's a fight. But at the same time, you can't just reassess. You also have to punch. So a good fighter is someone who reassesses, but also launches punches the second he sees an opening. So you can't...
It's reacting in the moment and dealing in the moment. Right?
So it's acting, reacting, but that means also that you can't have a block when you punch where you go like, am I going to punch, yes or no? Because that's too slow.
Yeah.
So it seems that a fight is when the parasympathetic and sympathetic work the best together. You can see that from dating, that first date.
Going back to it.
That first date, you're so nervous, but at the same time, you have to play it cool.
Yeah.
So you can't play it too cool, otherwise you're not interested.
Right.
But if you look nervous, too nervous, you look like you got nothing. Well, no, you're not joking. Trust me, she's not joking. Do not show weakness. But it's the same thing. So we know, for example, like the sympathetic is all the signs of a first date where, you start to sweat, the palpitation.
Exactly.
But at the same time, socialization is through the parasympathetic side. So you get both at the same time. So that's what we see. Now, a complete freeze mode, like if you go into a fetal position, like playing dead, is a full parasympathetic mode. Not from the inside, but as your relation to the outside. A panic attack, where you lose your shit and you have complete like incapacity to assess anything, very erratic movements, no coordination, is a full sympathetic mode. So is that the key? Is that you have the flow fight is working together, freeze versus flight are when they work separate.
Yeah, so you're hunting or you're being hunted, basically.
Is that the demarcation between the two? And then when being hunted, you have two choices. You either play dead or you lose your shit and run erratically. Right. So, interesting idea. Right. So, I'm talking about this because that's what I was thinking with Dr. Nasser's patient. Is like, they're on the other end and everything is hard, but they're in fight. So they can still know where they are. And then suddenly it's too hard. So then they start to go somewhere. Then they downregulate too much. Then they get a panic attack. So they went toward losing. They were winning and then they went toward that feeling of loss. That's what I saw. So every time I was starting to see either, I would correct at that moment. I would not let them go into the loss too much. So I'd be like, hey, come back with me, stay here. No, don't go there, because they start to go somewhere. I'm like, no, stay with me. Stay with me means sympathetic, but like both sides need to work together. Hey, reassess where you are. Because that's what they stop doing. Either you play dead or you go the other way. You cannot assess where you are anymore. When you play dead, you're just completely disjointed from your body, almost like. But when you play panic attack, then you can't listen to any words. You're gone as well. So if you see in both, there's an incapacity to assess where you are, either physically or mentally. Right.
So you need to be 100% sure of that mode, because that's the way you're going. You can't reassess
but that's anymore. Right. Well, because you just lost that capacity to to play the center. Right. So the way I got them back every time was that. But what I saw is that was the downregulation seems to be a major issue. So I was like, all right, so that's interesting. And then from there, like 2 weeks ago, I'm reading this paper, a week ago, I think. And of course, so it's always like that. There's a bunch of stuff. I'm like, I see a pattern there. Then eventually I stumble upon a very interesting study. This one is called The Role of Hyperventilation, Hypocapnia in the Pathomechanism of Panic Disorder. Hypocapnia means low CO2 levels. Hypercapnia is high CO2 levels. So hyperventilation is going to play a very heavy role on that. So there's a guy named Klein who wrote a lot about this. Very interesting. And I need to read some excerpt of this study and explain what it means so that you see the point of all this. But so let me read first certain sentences I need to translate because as usual it's very complex and they love big words. So sympathetic cotonia cannot arise during the hypercapnic phase since low pH decreases catecholamine sensitivity. Right, so my point.
Translation, please.
Right, so sympathetic cotonia just means activation of the sympathetic nervous system. Cannot arise, so go up during the hypercapnic phase, which means when CO2 levels are building up, since a low pH, since acidity decreases the sensitivity to the stress hormones, namely cortisol, adrenaline, whatever hormones you pump when you're fearful. Okay. Right. So the reason for that is because low pH, so acidity decreases your sensitivity to, let's say, adrenaline. It's not just adrenaline, it's cortisol, but I'm going to make it easier. I'm going to say adrenaline. Again, it's an oversimplification, but you get the idea. Whenever your pH goes down, right, so the acidity goes up, you are less sensitive to adrenaline from an inside perspective. The problem with that is what they're talking about is sympathetic goes up. What people don't understand is these two types of sympathetic reaction. You have the one that is inside, the one that is outside. What do I mean by that? When acute stress forces a physical response, that's actually osteocalcin that does that from the bone. That's what drives an acute stress response, and you're going to interact with the world, you're going to fight the world. When you can also have a sympathetic response that is toward the inside, jacking up the heart rate, jacking up the blood pressure, having an impact toward the brain waves. All that stuff, the catecholamine, the stress hormones are responsible for. So they're basically not the same. Right? You have the osteocalcin that is in charge of the bone sense a danger, massive reaction. But then the stress hormone creates a reaction on the inside. That reaction can take minutes, if not hours, to take place. So those are two completely different systems. Okay. Osteocalcin is immediate. Adrenaline is not. You think it is, but it's not. It can take up to hours for the cortisol or stuff like that to actually take effect.
And is the osteocalcin...
You speak a bit louder, please.
Is that because if you, for example, get hit,
yeah,
you'll feel it on the bone level and you have that reaction right away?
Right, that's exactly that. It also because the second you get hit, the body will start to react to that through the stress hormone, but to get you ready for healing after.
Okay.
Or whatever is needed after, or even go full sympathetic if need be.
Right.
But for that, you'll have to have a certain physiological background that needs to happen. And that's what we're going to talk about today. That's why it's so important. So, catecholamines can provoke panic attack when hyperventilation causes the hypercapnia to switch to hypocapnic alkalosis, overcompensation, and catecholamine sensitivity begins to increase. So what they mean is stress hormone, cortisol, adrenaline, right, can provoke a panic attack when the hyperventilation, when the changes in breathing, right, causes the hypercapnia, the high CO2 levels, to go toward low CO2 levels. So what they mean by that is hyperventilation, where you over-exhale. When you do that, you're going to lower the level of CO2 to the point that you're going to become alkaline instead of acidic. You're going to raise the pH level, so you're going to lower your acidity, and in turn, that's going to make you more sensitive to the stress hormone. So from there, what Klein was saying is that chronic hyperventilation does not generate panic attack. Actually, what it does is it's protective against panic attack. you hyperventilate to get into a phase that allows you to ward off the panic attack. The problem with that is that by doing that, you're going to increase the sensitivity to the adrenaline, which means if at that moment anything shows up, then you're going to spike into a panic attack. So what you're losing on one side, you're getting on the other. When you're getting on one side, you lose on the other. But so his entire point was that, so Klein denied the importance of acute or chronic hyperventilation in the generation of panic attacks. He described the positive correlation between chronic hyperventilation and panic attacks. He used this observation in order to put forth the idea that chronic hyperventilation is protective against panic attack. Acute hypocapnia elicits similar effects of the sympathetic nervous system, whereas acute hypercapnia evokes a parasympathetic effects, even though it's going to increase the levels of serum adrenaline and noradrenaline. So hypercapnia, which is higher CO2 levels, right? So you inhale all the time, but don't exhale. that type of stuff will increase the level of adrenaline and noradrenaline, which means the physiological background is getting ready. The hormones are going up, but you at the same time lower your sensitivity to it, which means you don't feel them yet. But as you switch your breathing, then suddenly you increase your sensitivity to hormones that are already there because they build up, and that will trigger something.
Okay.
So hyperventilation in that sense is to not fall into the panic attack, but at the same time it prepares everything for that. So there's an issue. So it's not a good way of doing it, obviously. Hyperventilation is a terrible idea. Anytime you're either too high or too low on CO2 levels, you screw up your body one way or another. So blah, 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 blah. So catecholamines sensitivity decreases in hypercapnic acidosis and increases in hypocapnic alkalosis. So that's exactly sorry what we did. So the hypercapnic, so the high CO2 levels, because of its level on acidity, kind of mess with your sensitivity to stress hormone. These changes in catecholamine level and sensitivity affect target organs. Lower pH is the trigger for noradrenaline release from the locus coeruleus during panic attacks. That's interesting because the noradrenaline from the locus coeruleus is also triggered by lactate. As lactate is produced, glycolysis, you produce ions that can also drive acidity. So we could see how the whole system is geared toward that. So it's a two-pronged system. It's like you have the osteocalcins that generate a physical response, while in the back, the physiological response from inside is getting ready for the need maybe of a higher level of energy brought through the stress hormone. Your breathing will decide whether you need that extra energy or not. So I think that the point of that is that's what the panic attack is. And we're going to talk about this in a second. But I was going back to my fighter. You have a certain amount of energy that you have because you're winning the fight, you assess and everything. But if you start to lose the fight and nothing that you do works, I need to dip into a much higher energy source to either run away for the fight or throw 5 punches real fast and I run out of energy. But I need to do something drastic. Right? And that's what the stress hormones are going to help you. They're actually very, very strong. They create a huge amount of energy at a great cost, by the way, but they're right there. But I cannot use them all the time. Otherwise, I would go full sympathetic. So I think the idea is, as a predator, I'm assessing. If I start losing, I turn into a prey. I go toward an extra amount of energy to get out of the bad situation.
Yeah. So you're basically creating a freak out to finish it. To have
another shot at it.
To have another shot at it. In running, they say if you panic, the finish is hopefully there soon. You
exactly.
Mean? It's like
that sounds like a Dutch saying.
Because I was translating it
exactly.
so
it
sounds a bit
Dutch sayings. But that's exactly that. So what's interesting is that's why.
You want the
so
to be
I think
there.
that's why we see with what they call the anaerobic threshold.
Yeah.
What I've been trying to explain, the lactate threshold, it's exactly that. Is at first you start to go up, but your nervous system is keeping everything in the center, so your lactate stay there. But then you start losing when you do enough sled sprints. You go like, all right, I'm not winning this, I'm start losing. Then the breathing changes, the nervous system changes, and the change in CO2 level will indicate, amongst other things, obviously, will indicate the need to dip into the stress hormone that take you into a panic mode.
Yeah.
And that's where the lactate goes up also. Signal from the nervous system, locus coeruleus, noradrenaline, but that's triggered also by lactate, so we can see how all this mixed together. It's a signal from the nervous system that you need that extra energy because you're losing the fight.
Right.
And that's what the anaerobic threshold is, the nervous system stuff. And now your sensitivity to stress hormone is very elevated because you need that to have access to a specific energy. But the downside is you're going to go full sympathetic.
Right.
So in a way, anaerobic threshold is when you go toward panic attack.
Right. So this is a very well-functioning system, but the problem is if you're using it for too little of a thing, right?
Well, it depends. It's not just that, but most people have panic attacks at work and everything.
Yeah.
You don't need the full sympathetic stuff. So the problem with also is that the panic attack, once it's set in, is too late.
Yeah. So what is the way to
Right.
deal
So that's why we keep going into that study, and then it becomes very, very interesting. So as Klein says in it, so there's another one, actually not Klein, but it's Gorman, who said, in panic disorder patients, we have found that elevated cortisol, fear, and hypocapnia are intercorrelated in the few minutes before actually experiencing an acute attack. So that's what was fascinating, because we are talking about downregulation leading to panic attack. Well, actually, that seems to be exactly what's happening. So, for example, they were showing that in another study, Borelli conducted electrophysiological studies in animals and concluded that panic attacks represent a pathological manifestation of a freeze mode, low arousal condition, rather than a high arousal condition of the fight and flight response. So what they mean by that is that freezing behavior initially manifests as immobility, bradycardia, and hypoventilation. So you're playing dead, but can transform into the flight response, panic attack, which is characterized by vigorous locomotion, tachycardia, and hyperventilation. The sudden change in a respiratory pattern that precedes the flight response indicate the similarity with panic attacks. So what they mean by that is that exactly what I'm trying to mention is that before the panic attack, there's actually a freeze mode. Will actually take a few minutes to set, and then we saw the changes happening through the freeze mode minutes before the panic attack. So, and again, that's what I saw with the patient. So the point was, it's a downregulation that causes the panic attack. So there are many, many different chances, things that happen during that freeze mode. You fall into, think of it as a prey. You fall into a freeze mode. Why? Because a predator is coming, and let's say a bear is coming, and I know I cannot win that fight. So first of all, it's going to be an assessment of the situation. Well, I start moving, and usually you start, that's why hyperventilation, you start to barely breathe, and then your everything just goes into spending the least amount of energy possible. That is a very old defense mechanism that we have when we are prey, like invertebrates and everything, where playing dead was seen as the best defense mechanism.
It's a valid one.
Depending, but it can be a valid one. It can be a valid one. So that's what happened. You're in freeze mode like this. What you're doing there is creating a physiological state to go into panic attack if needed. Mm-hmm. So let's say the bear is coming, and I'm with a young child, and I'm there, and we both playing dead, not moving, because if the bear comes, we both dead. Yeah. So we go like this, and then we just don't move. Low breathing, so you cannot hear. The heart rate goes down. Everything is designed to play dead to the most efficient way possible. You'll notice you even start to make yourself smaller. Internal torque, you go almost in a fetal position. At that moment, the baby cries. The bear sees us and is coming. So now that system of playing dead is not working. I need to save the baby. Then the ground, all of the adrenaline that has been pumping as I saw the bear coming, is going to be put to good use, which means I'm going to have a full sympathetic explosion where I can use all my energy in a very short burst to either run away with the baby as fast as I can, or fight the bear, die, but at least save the baby. So the idea at that moment is I need to spend as much energy as I have in basically as short of a time as I can. It's a very, very expensive mechanism, right? But it has a very good reason to exist. But this has been building up for hundreds of millions of years. The nervous system has been around for 600 million years. That phase is very, very old. So all preys have the same behavior. Freeze mode, downregulation, followed followed by a stress that causes a upregulation into panic attacks. So that it seems that for us human beings, we do that for exactly the same thing, which means if we approach a situation makes us go into a prey behavior, we go into freeze mode, and then any stress added to that leads us to panic attacks. The problem is that energy is being spent nowhere. So you have massive amounts of energy, the tachycardia, the hyperventilation, everything, and it goes nowhere because there is no fight. And then you're at work, and now and of course that, because you have such a high level of energy going up, will only lead to a bigger freeze mode. That will only lead to a bigger panic attack, to a bigger freeze mode, to a bigger panic attack until you crash.
The lower you go, the higher you go.
And now you're in fetal position, and then you can leave the house for 3 days. So it also tells you that once you're in panic attack, it's too late.
So it happens before.
Yeah, control has to be done in the freeze mode.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The control
That's
has to
what
happen. The action
freeze
has to
mode.
be taken there.
What we have to check is there's many things, but one of the things we could look at is the breathing in the freeze mode. That hyperventilation, that's a problem. Or because that's going to turn into hyperventilation, doesn't matter. Your CO2 levels are going too high, doesn't matter. They are not at their baseline. They will create one way or another a ground for what's coming.
So we're going again back to the idea of the baseline.
The baseline that we always talked about, and the key is do not go below, do not go past the baseline. When you have a panic attack, don't try to bring yourself down. Try to go back to your baseline. When you're in the down regulation, don't do that. Go back to your baseline. What we're selling right now in the fitness industry is down regulation. Always like, and I've been talking about the sympathetic not being a bad thing forever. Like you cannot namaste the bear away.
And it's like,
otherwise, panic attack.
Like, what's the first thing you say to someone who's panicking? Calm down.
Right. They cannot, and you're asking them to exhale, creating a low level of CO2 that creates its own set of issues. Right. So actually, you need to fight your way out of it. What needs to change is actually the mindset toward being a predator instead of a prey. Because the prey will always swing back and forth, back and forth. What you have to calm down is the pendulum swing. That's what you have to calm down. And breathing is obviously, like breathing into... So look what they do when you have a panic attack. They make you breathe in a bag because you keep inhaling the same CO2. So you go back that, and then that's going to mess with certain sensitivities. That's why. But that's already late. The key is we need to actually control in the freeze mode. That's what's preparing the panic attack, is the freeze mode. So the freeze mode is the key, which means only basing or stress response in down regulation is actually making things worse.
So this is why the setting with the airline and the Q-1
Q-1 works better.
Because you're training
baseline.
Your reaction to stress and staying
to
around
go back to your baseline. Yeah. Go back to your baseline. Yeah. Down regulation is just as bad as up regulation when done incorrectly. So that's the point. I mean, so it's not, you can't just down regulate. No, that's not true. That's why they always want a higher HRV levels. It's like, it depends. Yeah. Not always. It depends on your baseline. No, that's not true. No, there's not good or bad. There's your baseline, and what you can do is try to stay within it as much as possible, because anything past it, either way, is a problem. So you don't want to jack yourself to a 9 if you want to be at 7, but being at a 4 is not a good idea either. Everybody thinks you have to lower the baseline. That is not true. That's been said everywhere, even in the medical field and everything. It's like, oh, we're too sympathetic. I'm like, bullshit. No, we're not. That doesn't mean you're not stressed out at work, but always welcome to life. You're always going to be stressed out. I mean, life is pain. Existentialism, as said it, Nietzsche, 150 years, life is pain. Anybody telling you otherwise is selling you something. Nietzsche didn't say that, but anyway, someone else said it.
And then you die.
And in the meantime, you try to find meaning in it.
Right.
That's the way out. Life is suffering. Finding meaning in it is the way out of suffering. It is. So that down-regulation idea, you see, if it leads to a freeze mode, is the ground for panic attack. So we're going to talk more and more. I don't want to make those too long because there's so much information already, but go read the study, and if you need me to go over specific things, I'll do that again.
I don't think people want to listen more than a certain amount of minutes
No.
to your French accent,
Anyway,
right?
but what I found very interesting is that so the breathing affects obviously the gas exchange O2 CO2, but it's and I'm going to talk about that. There's also they were showing that it also affects the brainwave directly, not through gas exchanges, through active inference directly. Breathing, like the way you breathe, has an effect directly onto the brainwave, which means the way you also will see certain stress in your life, certain things in your life. So it's not just on the physiological level, even though there's that. There's also on the brain pattern. So breathing is really the connection between the brain and the body. So affecting it incorrectly one way or another has tremendous effects. So, but it's not enough to know how to breathe. You also need to know then when to breathe, how to breathe, but when. And the control of the freeze mode, I think, is going to be vastly more important than trying to control the panic mode, because it's by then it's already too late.
So you're going to the source, not to the...
Exactly, or at least one step behind.
Yeah,
And then one step back always. But
always.
the key is control the freeze mode first. Before we try to control the panic attack, let's look at the freeze mode. Anyway, we'll talk some more about that.
All right. Thank you guys for listening.
Bye, everybody.
If you guys want to read the study,
We'll put the stuff and
it's
everything.
on the Mighty Networks. Join us.
Yeah, and I hope to see some of you on the new mentoring program.
Right.
Bye, guys.
Ciao, ciao.